also have a profit motive, and there's nothing wrong with that. So in essence, you're a business. With that in mind, I want to talk to you about a couple of issues, and that's in section 2 called Establishing Practice, Structure, and Policies. And I want to tell you that unless you establish practice, structure, and policies, you could pay for all the consulting in the world. And unless this is established for your business, this consulting is going right out the window. As a matter of fact, I recently had a client who used a national consulting firm. And one of my staff came running up to me and said, "Oh my God, Dr. DMDX spent $11,000 to this national consulting firm in the last quarter." He was having difficulty with his practice, but the circumstances were beyond a consulting issue. As a matter of fact, Rob mentioned it in his talk. His practice was in serious trouble because when he bought it, he didn't get the proper advice and didn't do the proper due diligence, and it wasn't 50%. 80% of this guy's patient base came from one Fortune 500 company. And since 2007, what have we heard about a lot of those Fortune 500 companies? This one went the way of the ones I'm talking about, down, down, down. So the first thing they did was they took Delta Premium as the dental insurance that they were providing to their employees, and they dropped it all the way down. I think it was Aetna or something. The second thing they did was they laid off 30,000 people. This was 80% of his patient base. He came into me, I told him he was in a very precarious position, and he is and still is. And I want you to understand there's no magic pill. He said to me, "John, I understand." And we shook hands and out the door he went. Well, like I said, a couple months later, a staff member comes in and says, "John, I don't know how to tell you this. I mean, I'm Italian, I can tend to get a little emotional." You understand that, Jeff? So the thing is that I said, "Spend $11,000 in one quarter, you're what?" So I looked at it and sure enough he did. And I was about to email him or give him a call about this when he called me. And he said, "John, I know you told me not to, but I did anyway, but I'm calling to let you know I just terminated the contract." And I said, "Well, why did you terminate the contract?" And he said, "Because every time I talked to him, it appeared some representative was just reading off a canned questionnaire." And I said to him, I had a good answer. I said, "The reason you're feeling that way is because that's exactly what's happening. And this theory is not going to help you." So that's why before you go throwing money at something, make sure you do the research to find out. So we're talking about a dental practice, but we're talking about a business. And the practice has to have structure. And what do I mean by structure? Well, the best way to describe structure is an organizational chart. And you may say to yourself, organizational chart, isn't that something for big corporations? No. As long as you have a staff, you need an organizational chart. Because you and your staff need to know who is responsible for what. Who is responsible for what duty. And this can be clinical as well as administrative. In my realm, I'm talking about administrative, okay? Because in many practices I go into where they're having financial difficulty, and 99.9% of the time, this financial difficulty is lack of cash flow. That's the alarm bell for management problems in a dental practice. And when you go in there and you start asking, who's doing what, not me. So this structure is an organizational chart that lays out who is responsible for what and what is their job. In the administrative field, someone will be in charge of scheduling. Someone will be in charge of accounts receivable. If you are an insurance business, someone maybe the accounts receivable person will be in charge of filing the EOBs, the explanation of benefits. Irregardless, they have a job. They understand what their job is. Critically important. Critically important. Furthermore, this organizational chart and job description should be in writing. It doesn't have to be a 50-page dossier, but it has to be something that the employee knows. Studies have shown that staff, employees, perform better when they know their job and the ultimate goal of their job. So you establish that structure. The second thing you do is then you establish policies. And since I'm focusing on accounts receivable, let's talk about that. A policy for accounts receivable would deal with what is the accounts receivable or collection process of this practice. For example, when the patient comes in, payment is due at time of service. Now, I know that may shock a lot of y'all. Now, I'm talking about fee-for-service practices. If insurance, it's a different story. But many patients don't have that attitude towards your practice. These patients would never walk into a Macy's department store, Walmart, or whatever, and say, hey, I got the grill, I'll catch up with you, call me again, okay, I'll get it to you, don't worry. But yet, your services are taken, and this happens quite often. So generally speaking, a policy must be put in place to establish how you're going to collect that fee, and what are the parameters on collecting that fee. If the patient does not have the money for the service at that time, what happens in 15 days? What happens in 30 days? What happens in 45 days? When is this concluded? If it's not going to a payment plan. And when I say concluded, I mean you turn it over to collections or small claims. Yet, in many practices, this isn't the case. It's the case of, hello, are you going to bring a check? Yes, oh, thank you, I forgot all about it. Hello, call after call, notice or letter after letter, money going out the door. That's one thing where I state that if you wrote a check for that inefficiency every week, you'd stop it real quick. I'm going to show you tonight, though, between these two practices where it costs you money. So getting back to what I point, the policy is put in place. The next section, and I advise everybody to read this article, is establishing a yardstick. You've got the employees structured. You've got their job description laid out. They know what the job entails. How do they know if they're doing a good job? If it was football, we know when we cross the goal line, that's good, we scored. But in a job, how do you keep score? And it's very easy to do so. For example, in the collection arena, there may be ratios that you use, or there will be ratios that you will use that will be acceptable on the collections. I'm going to talk fee for service only because it's a little bit simpler, but you can do the same thing with the PPO practice because you can determine a collection percentage based on what your bill is versus what, if you're participating with the insurance company, what their fee is. But let's just talk fee for service to simplify. I would say we would expect a 95% collection ratio. I would expect that we would have a situation where less than 5% of our patients are over 90 days. And these 5% that over 90 days are on payment plans. Or there is some circumstances like they have a court case and that is causing this money to be out there. But I guarantee if I ran a lot of receivables at practices in here tonight, I'd see a ton of over 90 days. And when I asked what it's all about with Mrs. Jones, you couldn't tell me. And that's not to pick on any practice. 25 years, I've seen it all the time. So the policy is in place. The yardstick as to what constitutes a good job is in place. This isn't time-consuming or anything. This is why these dossiers of consulting don't work. Because what I'm talking about is getting into your practice and starting to help you to change people's behavior. And that's the hardest part. I've been in practices about this collection issue, and I've talked to the front desk people, and they all shake their heads, yes, yes, we get it, we're going to do it, we're fired up. 30 days later, I go out and receivables haven't improved one iota. So you know it's not being done. So this is where I get to my next point, monitoring. Once the yardstick is established, it's not any good. The structure makes no sense. The policy makes no sense. The yardstick makes no sense unless, of course, you monitor it. Now, how do you monitor it? You can monitor it. I monitor it for a lot of my practices when I do their quarterly or semi-annual or annual work by looking at these ratios. But I suggest that you as a practitioner can save yourself a lot of grief by simply taking a look at these reports where you work at with your consultant / CPA. And when I say CPA or consultant, I'm saying them interchangeably, because there is CPAs out there that specialize in the dental practice, and believe me, if you can find them, I think you need them, because they're in it with you for the long haul. They're not a consultant that's going to come in there and give you a bound dossier and be out of Dodge. They're there. They want to be your accountant. Jeff Bellisario back there's been my accountant for 25 years. Been my client, rather, for 25 years. I know that I don't look that old. He does, but the thing is that we've been around a long time together. Since he first bought his practice. What year was it, Jeff? 82. 82, man, you're old. So the thing is that I'm looking, the CPA/consultant should be looking for that long-term relationship, not to give you a 5-inch dossier, leather bound, for $10,000, okay? So now you've got the structure in, you've committed. And when I say committed, everybody thinks, oh, geez, what does this mean? If you knew how little it truly meant to switch gears and get into that, you would do it tomorrow, okay? Because what it basically entails is if you have someone that's on your side that's been working with you like a CPA consultant, that they'll get in there and they'll do this for you, okay? They will help you to establish the structure, the policies, the yardsticks, and the monitoring, okay? They can even assist you to do your own monitoring, okay? So let's just assume we've all done it. Now we can talk about consulting. Now we can talk about improving the efficiency of your practice. If you look at Section A, we talked about. Exhibit B I'm going to get to in a second. If you turn to Exhibit B on page 8, I guess it would be, this is a great yardstick right here, folks. If you have somebody that specializes in the profession, they can tell you with that bird's eye view what constitutes good ratios. I want you to understand that this exhibit doesn't mean these ratios are set in stone. In other words, I am not saying that advertising has to be 2.84% of your practice ratios or you're not doing a good job. What I'm saying is this gives us something to work off of for what our expenses should be, for what our profitability percentage should be. So this is one yardstick right here. So if you would, I'm going to now be at the podium because I want to work with you here. Turn to page 3 of your outline and work with me on the tale of two practices. I want to explain something to you before I get into it, and that is I did the balance sheet on the accrual basis, and I did the